Chapter 4 of Tractate Pesachim continues on the laws of Passover, but also covers a number of topics in regards to the concept of not deviating from customs of your native town. The Mishnah says, in a place where the custom of your town is to work just before Passover starts until midday, you can also do work then. If the custom is to not work then, you may not. If you go from a place where they do work before midday to a place where they do not, or vice versa, he has to hold like the stringent location where he cannot do work. Generally, a person shouldn't deviate from his local custom to avoid conflict. Similarly, if you're transporting crops during the sabbatical year when they're not harvested from a place where there are no crops to a place where there are, or vice versa, you're obligated to remove them. Rabbi Yehuda says that he should go out and bring for yourself, which will be defined. The Gemara says why the case discussed is with working before Passover and not, say, Shabbos, as we stop working before Passover a bit earlier. Alternatively, it's because there was a more severe punishment of excommunication by violating this by Passover. There are related points on abstaining from work by Shabbos and holidays discussed. It also talks about generally things that prevent you from receiving blessing, like relying on your wife's earnings, profiting from selling cane or jars as they have great bulk, so you'll be affected by the evil eye, and other similar points. It also says you'll only receive blessing when working on writing Torah, tefillin, mezuzahs, or vending for those and similar, if you do the work for the sake of a mitzvah. There are some other customs of towns discussed, like the people of one area who separated the challah tithe from rice, which was said to be incorrect. This and many other particular customs of areas are discussed further. This is qualified. It also goes through the punishments that were administered for violating certain of these principles, like excommunication and otherwise, and there are some additional points. This is all discussed further in regards to other regional customs. Even more laws are discussed on this. New Mishnah. If a location's custom is to sell small livestock to non-Jewish people, that's the custom we follow. Otherwise, not. You weren't allowed to sell large livestock to non-Jewish people out of concern that people would rent or lend them out, and the animals would be used on Shabbos, which is not allowed. Some say it's allowed to sell a maimed animal, which would just be used to be slaughtered, and others allow the sale of a horse. If the custom of your location is to eat roasted meat on the nights of Passover, that's what you can eat. If that's not your custom, then you can't. The Gemara says you can't designate meat for Passover because it resembles consecration for a sacrifice, which you're then eating outside of Jerusalem. This doesn't apply by wheat, as it's just that you're guarding it and keeping it from leavening over Passover. There's disagreement on the point on meat designation. It said that a man named Tadas of Rome did something similar, but he was nevertheless not excommunicated, as he was a great man who would assist Torah scholars. New Mishnah. If the custom of your place is to light a lamp by the night of Yom Kippur, you should light a lamp. If not, then you don't. Everywhere, however, you can light lamps in synagogues, study halls, in dark alleys, and for the sick. The Gemara cites some sources. There's also this discussion that you say that you have double blessing on a flame only when Shabbos ends, as that's when fire was created. This is discussed further in regards to the proper blessing formatting of the Adela prayer, and the Gemara argues as to when fire was created. One source says that there were 10 things created on the eve before the first Shabbos: Miriam's well, the manna, the rainbow, the Hebrew letters, the stylus used to engrave the 10 Commandments, the tablets of the 10 Commandments, Moshe's burial place, the cave where Moshe prayed by the golden calf and where Eliyahu hid, the mouth of Balaam's donkey, and the opening of the pit which would swallow Korach and his followers. Some add to this list fire and the mule, the ram that Avram slaughtered instead of Yitzchak, and the shamir worm which was used to build the temple. Some also said the first pair of tongs, but others disagree. Anyways, so we see that the difference is that the fire mentioned in this list is the fire of Gehenna, while our fire was made right as Shabbos ended. But there's a different source which says that there were 7 things created before the world itself, which were Torah, repentance, Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, Gehenna, God's throne of glory, the temple, and the name of Mashiach, all based on verses. So we clarify that the space of Gehenna was made before the world, but the fire of Gehenna was made on the second day of creation based off a different discussion. And actually, our fire was thought to be created just before Shabbos and was actually made as Shabbos ended, and we bring a source. Some add to the list of things created just before the first Shabbos: Aaron's staff, demons, and Adam's garments. On another list, there are 7 things concealed from people: the day of their passing, their consolation, the depth of judgment, what other people are thinking, how your business dealings will result, when the dynasty of David will return with Mashiach's coming, and when our exile will end. It also says that there are 3 things that God thought to create during the creation of the world and were made later: the fact that corpses decompose, that mourners should eventually forget about the deceased, and that produce should rot. Some add that currency systems should function. New Mishnah. In a place where the custom is to work on the fast of Tisha B'Av, you can work. If it's not, then you don't. Everywhere, however, Torah scholars don't work. Some say that everybody could refrain from work on this day without appearing haughty. The Gemara qualifies these points. There's a repetition of an argument from Tractate Bracha 16b in regards to not appearing haughty regarding not working by this fast by Tisha B'Av, and contrary opinions by a groom not saying the Shema prayer on the night of his wedding. New Mishnah. In Judea, they had the custom to work just before Passover until midday, while in Galilee, they would not work at all. Beis Shammai does not allow working on the night of the 14th, but Beis Hillel allows it until sunrise. The Gemara qualifies these opinions further. New Mishnah. Rabbi Meir says any labor began before the 14th can be finished on the 14th. You can't start a labor on the 14th, even if it finishes before midday. The rabbis say tailors, barbers, and launderers can work before Passover until midday. Some also add shoemakers. The Gemara debates if Rabbi Meir's opinion is discussing general labor or labor needed for a holiday or what. In the end, based on sources, we say he'd allow labor if it's a circumstance where it's for a holiday need and it's to complete an unfinished task. Tailors are uniquely allowed, as an unskilled person can sew in an unusual manner during the intermediate days of the holiday, and barbers and launderers can also do the work, as someone who returns from overseas or is released from prison is allowed to cut their hair or do laundry during these days, and some also allow shoemakers, as those making the holiday pilgrimage were allowed to repair their shoes during these days. The disagreement on shoes is if you can derive the allowance of making shoes from the fact that you can repair them. New Mishnah. You can put eggs under hens on the 14th of Nisan. If the hen ran off, you can put it back. If it died, you can swap it out. On the 14th, you can clear feces from beneath an animal's feet, but on the intermediate days of the holiday, you can only move it to the sides of the stall. You can take utensils to and from a craftsman's house, even though they're not needed for the holiday. The Gemara clarifies that the fact that you can return a hen to the eggs is during the intermediate days of the holiday. There's disagreement if you can do this after 3 days since it left, as at that point it no longer wants to brood, so the eggs are no longer usable. The disagreement is if we're concerned about a minimal loss or not. The other points are also argued on. New Mishnah. The residents of Jericho had 6 unique practices. 3 were allowed. They would graft palm trees on the 14th of Nisan, they would wrap the Shema prayer, which will be explained what that means, and they would reap and stack their grain before the Omer offering. 3 practices they did were criticized by the rabbis, which were that they would allow the branches used by the temple treasury for personal use, they would eat fallen fruit from beneath trees on Shabbos, and they would give payah charity from vegetables, which was problematic in regards to tithes. The Gemara says similarly, there were 6 things that King Chizkiah did, 3 the sages agreed with, which were that he dragged the bones of his wicked father Achaz on a bier of ropes, he crushed the copper serpent that Moshe had made, and he hid the book of remedies written by King Shlomo, which had the cure for every single illness. There were 3 things that sages disagreed with that he did, which were that he cut down the doors of the temple and sent them to the king of Syria, he stopped up the waters of the Gihon River, thinking there would be a siege, and he once made the year a leap year during Nisan when it's too late to do that. It goes through the above points, how they would graft the trees, opinions as to what wrapping the Shema means. Some say that they would not have a separation between the first Shema verse and the rest of the paragraph. Some say the lack of a break was elsewhere, it's discussed. It also says why we see the verse Baruch Shem between the Shema verses, which isn't in the Torah, as it's taught that right before the forefather Yaakov was going to pass, he called his sons to tell them what would happen in the future with Mashiach's coming and whatnot, but the divine presence left him right then, so he was upset, thinking that he had done something wrong, but his sons told him reassuringly the Shema verse, and he responded saying Baruch Shem. There's still question if we say it, as it's not explicitly written as a part of the Shema, so we say it quietly instead. Some said it loudly back in those days so heretics wouldn't cause issues with their questions as to what was being said, but others did not. The remaining points are further discussed. This is all qualified further. There are additional points on the payah charity and the offerings of sacrifices, and it says that one man, Yisachar from Barkai, a Kohen Gadol, would wrap his hand while performing the temple service. So he was punished that a king and queen of the Hashmonaean dynasty started arguing if kid meat is better than lamb meat, so they decided to summon the Kohen Gadol to resolve this dispute, who answered disrespectfully and said that lamb must be better as it's brought every day as a part of the Talmud offering. So the king didn't like his disrespect and ordered his right hand cut off. So Yisachar tried to bribe the hand cutter to only get his left hand cut off, which happened, but the king found out and he ended up getting his right hand cut off also anyways. It also says that clearly this guy had no idea what he was talking about, as there are clear verses implying that they're equally preferable. And that's the end of chapter 4.